Good evening, and welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello. The folks we have on today are some real experts. Keep your ears wide open.
Yes, they are. Special guests, Simson Garfinkel and Chris Jay Hoofnagle, authors of the soon-to-be-released book, Law and Policy for the Quantum Age. Mr. Hoofnagle is professor of law and information in residence at the University of California, Berkeley. He teaches about the regulation of technology, focusing on computer crime law, cybersecurity, internet law, privacy law, and consumer protection law. Simson Garfinkel received undergraduate degrees in chemistry, poli-sci, and science, technology, and society program from MIT in 1987, an MS in journalism from Columbia University in 1988, and a PhD in computer science from MIT in 2005. Mr. Garfinkel has over 30 years of research and development experience with over 50 publications in peer-reviewed journals and conferences. Gentlemen, welcome to Community and Technology.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Let me come in and say a little bit more. I hadn't met Chris Hoofnagle before this, but I've been reading his stuff all over the place for many years. He's in the middle of almost all the key debates on things like privacy. He understands security. He understands the law. So there's a lot that can and maybe should be discussed there. Simpson's work I've known since 20 years ago. How many books did you write back then?
Thank you very much, Dave, for having us on the show. This is the 17th book I've done, but most of those books have been done with co-authors, and I could not do any of that work without my co-authors. So the idea for this book came from Chris Hoofnagle. He was working on it before I joined, and we just happened to be sitting next to each other on an airplane. And Chris told me about the project, and it sounded really great, something that I wanted to be a part of.
And Simpson, when I first knew him, was doing things like running an internet service provider, which I thought of as Martha's Vineyard, but I found out before was Cape Cod. I think you were one of the key people in the Boston Mac user group, if I recall. Yes, Simpson, do I remember that right?
Yeah, it's actually that the internet service provider was on Martha's Vineyard, and the Mac users group. It wasn't really the Mac users group. I was active in the Next Step users group, the Next users group. So after Steve Jobs got thrown out of Apple, he started a new computer company called Next, and they made black computers. And I was very active in the Next world.
I remembered it wrong. And I certainly know the difference between those computers. The Next was way ahead of the Macintosh. It was way ahead of its time.
We are all using Next machines now, right? So like Apple iPhones are little Next stations. They're running the same operating system that the Next Step machine used. And if you use a Mac, you're basically using a Next workstation.
It was one heck of a machine, absolutely. And you became a security expert, or you wrote a set books on security that I remember being the standard stuff at the time. We now have a different set of security issues that you just wrote a new book about. Why does quantum computing matter for security?
Well, I'd really like to let Chris answer that, if that's okay. Would that be okay?
I was just about to go to Chris whenever you finished answering. So please, Chris, jump on in.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's often said that quantum computers will make it possible to levy very fast attacks against encryption. One of the main points of our book is to temper that claim and to explain the different ways quantum computing will lend speed to cryptanalysis and the many ways in which it will not. So our book is in a way, an attempt at moving the narrative on, moving it away from cryptanalysis onto the other pro-social and exciting uses of quantum technologies out there.
Chris, could you briefly for our audience tell us what is quantum computing and what are quantum technologies?
Well, the idea here, and I'm going to invite Simson to elaborate more deeply, but on the highest level, what our book is about are a series of different technologies that use the smallest particles in order to perform some utility in the world. So we divide these utilities into sensing, computation, and communication. So we see quantum technologies as technologies that leverage quantum effects in order to do things like sense the world, measure the world, compute, or communicate.
Okay.
And how much better is it at most problems compared to the computers we're used to?
Well, right now, quantum computing is really good for getting papers published about quantum computing, and it's really good for raising money. So the excitement for quantum computing started in the 1990s when there was a theoretical discovery that a fully functioning, fully realized quantum computer would be able to factor large composite numbers quickly, by which we mean in polynomial time rather than exponential time, by which we mean before the sun destroys the planet Earth. That possibility caused lots of money and lots of people to get interested in quantum computing. At the same time, there was some theoretical work on using quantum mechanics to send encrypted messages, to send secret codes. And that work was theoretically correct. And people in the 90s tried to realize that technology. And it was realized in the early 2000s commercially. But when we talk in the book, one of the first things we start talking about is quantum sensing. And that is using quantum mechanic effects to make precise measurements of time or distance. And that technology goes back to the 1950s, really. If you've ever had an MRI, magnetic resonance interference scan, that's using quantum technology. And there's now very precise ways for measuring changes in the gravity of the Earth and measuring stars exploding on the other side of the galaxy. So we have a lot of really amazing technology for making measurements using quantum mechanical effects.
And what are the practical uses of what we call quantum computers as opposed to research instruments that are already out there? Any?
It's great for raising money. So if you have a PhD in quantum computing, you can get a job doing research in quantum computing.
And
I hear a bit of sarcasm there.
No, there's no sarcasm.
Really?
I'm being absolutely serious. Universities are staffing up for quantum. It's a very hot PhD to have. There's a lot of underlying technology. Quantum is in the future, but organizations that wait for the future before staffing up are going to be left behind.
Gotcha.
And
so
what are some of the organizations outside of academia that are staffing up and building?
Corporations, government laboratories. What other kinds of organizations are there? Manufacturers that are building things. The underlying control over reality, matter, manufacturing necessary for quantum, almost certainly spills into other areas. Quantum computers are very sensitive machines. So if you have the technology to build a quantum computer, then you also have the technology to build very precise quantum measuring machines. And it's just like the space program, say in the 1960s. We got a lot of benefits out of the space program, even though there's very little obvious advantage to putting a person on the moon.
Well, let's not debate that one, because that debate would go on far longer than we have. But let's take this to the thing that everybody's thinking of on quantum. Why do you say we don't have to worry about our encryption being cracked for many years because of quantum? Because lots and lots of people are worried about it. Why don't we have to worry?
Chris, do you want to take that?
You're best placed for this.
Okay, so there's been a lot of work so far on what would be required in terms of a working quantum computer. Google put out a paper saying that, like, with today's machines have on the order of 50 to 100 what's called qubits, and they estimate that a machine would need to have roughly 10 million qubits. And it would need to be able to keep them operational for, say, 8 hours. And so the theoretical paper of what would be required to crack a single RSA encryption key is so far beyond today's capabilities. A decade is very, very optimistic. The real threat is that messages recorded today might be cracked 20, 30, 40 years in the future with a quantum computer. And I have no doubt that in 20, 30, 40 years, a machine will be built that can crack messages that are recorded today. And that is an important threat for some organizations, but it's not an important threat for other organizations.
And let me throw this one at Chris, who's done a whole lot of work on related areas. Okay, if we think our encryption itself is sound, how secure are we against other attacks? And the reason I'm asking that is my impression is that if a major nation or anybody sophisticated enough, like the NSO group, wants to crack something really fervently, they almost always will manage to get it. Not necessarily cracking the encryption, but attacking some other part of the system. How realistic is that?
There's a lot in your question there. There's a lot of important dynamics. Determined adversaries can attack people and get through by investing enough resources to do so. And the attack may not be on the encryption. The attack is often on the person. So you trick the person, or you trick a person who has a close relationship with the target, let's say a family member or a personal assistant or the like. And that gives you the insight necessary to understand what the target is up to. So there are many attacks on people now. They often aren't exactly technological. They are technology aided, but they're often about tricking the person rather than circumventing a special technology. Now, the big exception to that now is there are companies that will sell exploits into certain platforms, and well-resourced adversaries can buy these attacks and break into people's phones and computers. But I think for most of us, I think we all have to think personally about our lives, about who is willing to spend resources to attack us. And for most of us, there isn't someone with the determination and resources of a nation state that can bear down and break into our devices. We have to pay more attention as individuals to other entities in our lives, like our employers and other people who are around us who have access to information about us and might use it in ways that are adverse to our interests.
So if I could follow up on this, right now, people who are storing information, like if you're worried about information you might have on your computer or worried about your email, for most people, the odds that your system will be attacked are very, very low. But your information is also stored on servers belonging to businesses. It's stored in the cloud. It's collected with other people's informations, and there are these concentrations of valuable personal information. And so most people in the United States have been told that a business where they have their credit card stored has been hacked, and their personal information has been taken over by hackers. And medical records have been revealed, and websites where lots of people were using it confidentially was used. People are using iPhones or Android phones, smartphones, and the risk isn't that some hacker is going to get into your phone. The risk is that you're using an app and the app is running an advertisement, and that advertisement is tracking your geolocation, reporting precise information about where you are. That's being collected, it's being sold. And so adversaries are able to learn a great deal of information about you. And they're not doing it just to you, they're doing it to many, many people at the same time. These mass attacks, that's a privacy issue, that's a data use issue. And some of the things that quantum is being used for is allegedly to protect against that, but in practice it won't. And we talk about that in the book. There's an internet service provider that is advertising that it's using quantum encryption to protect its links. And the fact that they're using quantum encryption rather than other encryption really doesn't matter for the links that are being protected.
What about what the Chinese are doing? They're talking about using quantum protection for a lot of security issues. Do they have something substantial there, do you know?
Chris?
Yeah, some of the best state of the science work is being done in China. This is another reason why we wrote this book. It was a kind of call to action for the United States to invest in these technologies and to remain competitive. Arguably, the Chinese are ahead in 3 different areas of quantum technologies, 3 different kind of achievements, one of which is a quantum communication system that has end-to-end key distribution using quantum key distribution over a satellite, which means that they can communicate over basically the entire landmass of China with a network that is partially satellite-based and partially fiber optic based. And that means that if we were to intercept those messages, we would not be able to make sense of them. We might be able to make sense of the traffic data attached to those messages. And we might be able to break into the devices that relay those messages. But it is a muscular demonstration of the prowess and how China has really pulled ahead in an implemented version of the technology. And not only that, this isn't like information coming out of the state media. This is the fundamental discoveries that led to the creation of this network are in Nature and Science magazine.
So I'd like to emphasize what Chris said. The really scary thing from an American point of view, about what China is doing is not that they have some sort of cryptographic network that even with a quantum computer, we wouldn't be able to take messages captured today and decrypt them 40 years from now. The really scary thing from a US perspective is that they've done that and we haven't, and they can do that and we can't. And people are used to thinking that China is technologically behind us. And what this shows is that China can take key areas and excel beyond where we are. that with their command economy, they can do science and engineering in key areas of national significance and pull ahead. And you know, there are reasons for this. But go ahead, Dave.
I think we have to take a break, which Stu, and when we come back, I'm going to give you some practical examples of what I'm seeing China doing that go right to some policy questions that I'm looking at. But I think, Stu, we need to declare a station break.
Okay, yes. We're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stu Reed and Dave Burstein on community and technology. We're speaking with Simson Garfinkel and Chris Hoofnagle about quantum technology and quantum computing. We're going to take a brief musical break and be right back. Stay tuned.
Every gal strutting with her beau through the streets covered white with snow. Happy smiles everywhere you go. It's Christmas night in Harlem. People are feeling mighty good in that good old neighborhood. Yeah, it now be it understood. Christmas night in Harlem. Oh, everyone is gonna sit up until after 3. Everyone, we be all lit up like a Christmas tree. Oh, come on now, every Jane and Joe, greet your sweet, neat the mistletoe with a kiss and a hidey-ho. Christmas night in Harlem. Gonna sit up until after 3. Everyone be all lit up like a Christmas tree. Come on now, every Jane and Joe, greet your sweet niece to mistletoe with a kiss and a hidey-ho. Christmas night in Harlem. Oh, what a night in Harlem. Oh, come on now, every Jane and Joe, I greet your sweet niece to mistletoe with a kiss and a go, go, go.
Okay, we're back. This is Community and Technology. Just took a brief musical break with Louis Armstrong, Christmas Night in Harlem. Community and Technology, Dave Burstein and Stu Reed. Special guests on the show, Simson Garfinkel and Chris Hoofnagle. We're talking about quantum computing. Dave, where were we before the break?
Well, since you always get a new audience in the course of a radio show, let me ask Simson or Chris to take a moment to talk about what is the book. I think it just came out. Has it hit the stores yet? Simson?
So our book is Law and Policy for the Quantum Age, and it is available on the publisher's website, Cambridge University Press, as a free download, as a PDF file today. If you want to pay for the book, a physical book, you can order it from Amazon or the CUP website, Cambridge University Press. You can order it as a paperback or as a Kindle book, or as a hardback book. And the Kindle paperback and hardback will be available on January 5th.
And you said something that will surprise most people. You're working with a commercial publisher, Cambridge University Press, and you're giving away the book. What do you think that will result in? How will that work out?
I think that will result in a lot of people citing the book in academic articles that wouldn't have otherwise cited the book. I think it will result in the book showing up when people do Google searches. I think it's going to be great.
And what about
more broadly at Cal? We're interested in doing more open access publishing, so that the work we do, the work I do, is paid for by the government. So our people should be able to have access to it, and so that's another public interest reason behind trying to make more of our work free. I also think that we're going to launch other people working in this field. I think we got ahead of an issue, and that we set up a landscape that a lot of other people are going to expand and develop in greater detail.
This is not a book that would make us a lot of money, but this is a book that can have a big impact.
Guys, can you talk a little bit about the law and policy aspect of the book? You talk about law and policy of quantum computing, and you kind of talked around some of the technology stuff, but what are the law and policy issues that you guys are delved into?
I'll jump off with this. Many technologies get deployed in our society without a conversation about what they mean for people's civil liberties and what it means for their privacy and what it means for their safety. And quantum technologies could be another one of these innovations that law enforcement, that intelligence agencies, that companies use that further give them more power to sense, that is, to surveil, and to make sense of the world. And so one of our concerns is whether this is going to be a technology like a lot of others that end up getting deployed by police against citizens and so on, without a discussion of the civil liberties impact and without a discussion of what ought the police need to do before they use, let's say, a quantum sensor to try to peer inside your car or under your clothes or through your roof. And too often in the United States, we let that type of thing happen without having a discussion about whether it's something we ought to be doing.
And let's go back, if I may, to where we just were, because there's the other question about the book. Do you think you'll make more or less money because you're giving it away?
No, this isn't about making money.
Well, let me give you an example. We had Cory Doctorow on the show not long ago, and he took the audio book. He didn't want Audible to put it out with DRM. And so he put it out there without DRM, knowing it would be copied. And did you hear how well he did? He made over $200,000 in the sales of the book because it got so much more publicity, so much more outreach, and so many more people being interested than would have if he hadn't given it away. He probably made a lot more money than he ever would have made from Audible on the same book. So it may not be such a bad idea commercially on some books, those that are going to find a really enthusiastic audience. Your book is going to sell to every library in the world, and I suspect Cambridge would be just fine, but it may be that you're going to sell even more. Let me take it, though, because Stu wants to talk about the public policy implications of this. And I happen to be in the middle of one of the major debates of our times on technology policy. As some of you people know, the United States has decided to block many Chinese companies from the most advanced chip making capacity. And since chips are in the heart of everything, including the mobile phone I'm talking to you on, that is a crippling power for the United States to have. It cost Huawei literally $40 billion in sales when the US blockade cut their phone sales. That's not trivial, and it's going to keep on going. Now, the mechanism of this has nothing to do with American exports or even American technology. It turns out that There's one and only one company in the world capable of making the machines that can make the most advanced chips that are called EUV, extreme ultraviolet. You can't make a 5G cell phone of any quality without an EUV machine. And all the new high-powered chips from Intel and AMD and Qualcomm and Samsung are using this technology. And the chips are all made with a remarkable $200 million machine come from ASML in the Netherlands that the United States is blocking from being sold to China. Everything else you need to make advanced chips, and I've done the research on this, is available from non-American, in fact, and non-European sources. The Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese themselves are not necessarily the best in every technology, but can produce just about everything else except the EUV machine. So the blockade on the EUV machine is holding back Chinese technology massively. And we say that's legitimate as a security issue. That it also holding back the technology for the Chinese military. And I'm sure it's affecting that. Question is it going to work? And the Chinese, who are working very hard with essentially an unlimited budget and literally dozens and probably hundreds of companies working on the different components needed, are trying to make their own EUV machine. Every pundit out there, including some who now work for the US government, says, oh, they can't do that for at least 10 years. I don't believe that, because I believe that being born in Shanghai does not make you any stupider than somebody being born in San Jose, San Diego, Taipei, or Amsterdam. And the Chinese certainly are capable of doing what anybody else does. So it was really interesting as you guys were talking about how the Chinese are actually ahead in some of
Dave, you just muted yourself.
That is why we don't like phone calls.
Okay.
Okay. My sense is that the Chinese will do what the Russians did in 1949. In 1945, the US had the bomb. There was a lot of things at the UN and elsewhere about what should be the international role of nuclear weapons. And everybody assumed that the Russians wouldn't have a bomb anytime soon. So it was a very profound issue in 1947. 4 years after Hiroshima, the Soviet Union exploded a nuclear bomb with some minor help from a few spies, but that wasn't the start, the heart of it, but showed that, yes, Russians are not stupider than Americans and they can make bombs too. I think we're going to see that on the EUV machines, because the Chinese have made it a state priority to make this for very good reasons. Although I can't predict the future, neither could Yogi Berra. But let's bring this back to the cryptography. One of the reasons I think the Chinese will not take 10 years to reproduce it is I'm assuming that the Chinese government, because this is key strategy for them, unlimited resources, has cracked ASML and all the companies using their machines and has the complete blueprints of the machine and all the technical papers and all the work papers and so on. That when a government like the US or China really wants to get in, they're likely to find a way. Chris, am I off base making that guess?
Well, the lead up to your question was whether the US strategy will work. And I think we have to think about what work means here, and export controls and controls over the sale of technology are part of a patchwork strategy to give a nation advantage over another. And there's lots of ways around it. And so offensive cyber would be one way to try to catch up with the Dutch device. I think there's a lot of room here to think about what we can do better as the United States. I mean, one is simply more investment in basic research and development, something that has waned in recent years and is now coming back. But another key thing to think about is immigration. Many of the people who are building devices or problematic technologies for other countries are actually trained in the United States. Still, the majority of people training in quantum technologies will come to the United States, and they will go to MIT or they'll go to Berkeley to train. And it's my opinion that we ought to be doing a lot to keep foreign students in the United States after we've invested our resources in training them. They could make excellent contributors to the American economy. And there's no reason for us to send people home where they can end up working for adversaries. Potentially, especially when sending them home means they'll be working for an adversary.
You're saying policy is doing that, Chris, sending them home?
Well, just our immigration policy, the focus and the lens we've used could be very different. And we could say that we could give express priority to people who are studying in quantum and cyber, in nanotechnologies and several other technologies that are going to be really important in the next 10 years, and encourage those students to stay in the US. I think many of them do. I know my foreign students come to Berkeley and they love it here. I think many of them would like to stay.
So I'd like to emphasize that I'm entirely in agreement with what Chris is saying, but we don't just make it hard for graduate students to stay here once they've graduated. We're increasingly making it difficult for graduate students to come here in the first place, and for undergraduates to come here in the first place. And we're making it difficult for people who are trained elsewhere, and there are many good universities in all over the world, to come here. We have a system for employer-sponsored visas, which is capped at the number of visas that are available. We could do so much more by making the US an attractive place for people in the world to come to do science and technology. And for the past few years, we've been making it harder to do that. And that it's been a concerted effort to make this a less hospitable place for foreign researchers and scientists to come.
Simpson, you got a PhD from one of the best engineering schools in the world, maybe the best. Well, some people would say Stanford or somewhere are peers now. How many of your colleagues there were originally from the US?
So I'd first push back on saying that any school is the best, because schools are all good in different things. And what I really appreciated about MIT is the entire milieu, but it's different than other schools. It's not that it's better. But I will tell you that many students, when I was a PhD student at MIT between 2002 and 2005, many students were from the US and many students were not. But I'm told that there is a higher proportion now of students who are not from the US. The important thing to look at is not MIT. The important thing to look at is all of the schools in the United States. And what is limiting the ability of faculty in the US to do research? And what's limiting the ability of people in the US to do research is all of the above. It's the lack of people, it's the lack of funding, it's the lack of institutional commitment, it's freedom of exploration. We need to do a much better job on science and engineering research in the United States.
I can put some more anecdotes in there that were really dramatic to me. I write about networks. I'm doing a book on 5G and so on. So I read the papers there. And when I see an academic paper coming out of Illinois, for example, or Stanford or NYU, usually more than half of the researchers on a large paper are not originally from the US when I look at where they got their bachelor's degree. Many, many are from China and from India and from everywhere else. A lot of Iranians, in fact, in electrical engineering are important. And anything that holds back these people, and they are being held back, especially the Chinese, but we're seeing a lot of discrimination against Muslims. A friend of mine teaches at Stanford, and he said he wasn't sure he should go to China because it would to give some speeches. And he's a distinguished electrical engineer, because it would raise too many questions. Are you guys following the case of the Harvard professor who's about to go on trial?
So
absolutely. Yeah, you know what's interesting in these cases is that I mean, I'm a PI on grants, and you have to write a book length application to apply for money from the government. And what's happening in these cases is that people can make very minor omissions in these huge application packages. And that can become the basis for a lie to the government that supports an investigation and ultimately a prosecution. And so this is scary, because one of the things you do in these grants is you report how much effort you spend on a project. And of course, as a faculty member, it's very difficult to be able to precisely mete out how you're using your attention and time. And there are emergencies come up and so on. So faculty members who, they pick up a side job doing some other type of work can end up misrepresenting to the government their effort, and it can ensnare them in one of these investigatory nets. And that appears to what's happened to Professor Lieber. But what's important about his case, and what's important about other cases out there, is that it's one thing to have an omission in a filing to the government. It's another thing when investigators come to interview you, and what you say to those investigators is very important, and it better be truthful. And if you look at the cases out there, oftentimes why people are getting into trouble is there's some misrepresentation in that interview. But to your larger point, it is absolutely, these prosecutions are absolutely causing a chilling effect on people in academia.
So I'd like to speak to the issue of Iranian researchers, which you raised. I know of several Iranians that went to Canada instead of to the US, because Canada has much more enlightened immigration policies and visiting policies, and their faculty in Canada, and we don't like, officially, we have a lot of problems when Iranians come to the United States. And many of these people don't want to go back to Iran, but we view them with suspicion because of where they're coming from. And this is a real problem for computer science, for electrical engineering, but really for all the sciences and engineering disciplines.
Yes, in fact, my friend who teaches at Stanford once told me that his best graduate students have been coming from Sharif University in Iran, and they probably couldn't get a visa these days. And one of the key theorists in electrical engineering doing digital signal processing is a Palestinian at MIT, Dina Katabi. And people like that have been critical to the progress you're wanting to make. And they're really feeling the pain if they want to work in the US, and many of them aren't. I think Dina is more interested in her startup than in anything political. But if she wanted to come to MIT today, she'd have a very careful look at what her choices were. And that's costing us a lot. We're running out of time. So what are the questions I should have asked you that I didn't think to ask?
You should ask us how somebody would get involved in quantum and why would they want to do so?
Especially in elementary school.
Yes. So there are books available that are at all sorts of levels. Let's start at high school and college. Somebody who wants to learn about that, they can download open source software that simulates quantum computers, and they can get time on quantum computers for free and actually run real programs on real quantum computers. And there's at least 2 different manufacturers that are doing that. At the elementary,
you can give names.
I'm sorry?
You can give names to make
Yes,
it easy
but
for people to find.
Just, you can use a search engine and find it very easily.
Right. And if you're not able to use a search engine, you shouldn't be asking that question.
At the elementary school level, I think that we really need to be teaching physics as it is rather than a simplified version of physics, that the classical physics. I think that we should be teaching quantum first throughout all of the educational curricula.
Stu, how are we doing on time?
We're just about out. I'd like to ask Chris the same question. Chris, what haven't we asked? What else would you like to talk about? We got a couple minutes left on the show.
I would emphasize that ends to civil liberties and to privacy are not inevitable. There are things we can do to mitigate the impacts of technology. And these steps are both technological, as in taking strategies to create countermeasures for invasive technologies, but also legal, where we can place reasonable limits on law enforcement and companies in their use of devices that can invade people's privacy and civil liberties. So one important lesson I wanted to get across in this book is that we can do things today to make sure that quantum technologies provide a brighter future for us. And we don't have to live with a kind of creeping dread that all encryption is going to go away and that all privacy is going to melt away with the coming of this technology.
And that's an issue that we could talk for many shows about. And I know both of you have done a whole lot of work that goes beyond the book, but let's identify the book for people who are interested and tell them how they can get it, including the free copy.
I'm happy to. The book is called Law and Policy for the Quantum Age. It's forthcoming from Cambridge University Press in January 2022, but a free version of the entire book is online at the Cambridge University Press website. And if you just search for the title, you'll find it. And we're delighted if you read it, whether you pay for it or not.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Dave, any final comments before we close out?
We just listened to a couple of people who are well worth listening to on this subject. That's one of the pleasures of doing this show. When there's something I don't really understand or want to know more, with a radio show, I can say, come tell it to a whole lot of people. And we get interesting people like Simson Garfinkel and Chris Hoofnagle, world experts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Appreciate it. This has been Comedian Technology, Dave and Stu Reed with special guests Chris Hoofnagle and Simson Garfinkel. Thank you guys. Stay tuned for more news and information. WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.